Your little berry patch is about to serve a higher purpose, Mr. Miller. The words hung in the humid July air, thick and cloying like cheap perfume. Karen, the president of the New Estates at Willow Creek Homeowners Association, stood on the edge of my property, a thick binder clutched to her chest like a shield. She was flanked by two men in bright orange vests holding survey equipment, their faces impassive. Her floral print dress was stretched tight across her frame, a garish splash of color against the deep green of my blueberry fields. She pointed a perfectly manicured but stubby finger at the 10-acre parcel my grandfather had planted 70 years ago. This entire section, she declared, her voice ringing with the unearned authority of a petty tyrant, will be graded and gravel surfaced for community overflow parking. We have the Founders Day Gala next month, and our residents simply cannot be expected to park on the street. She smiled, a thin, self-satisfied line that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone who had never been told no and had no intention of starting now. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. This wasn't just land. It was my family's legacy, my retirement, my peace. And she was talking about paving it for a party. Before I let my 30 years in the Marine Corps take over my mouth, take a moment to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had your own run-in with an HOA that thought they owned the world. Believe me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Now, where were I? Oh, yes, staring down the barrel of a full-scale suburban invasion. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind a master gunnery sergeant takes before addressing a platoon of undisciplined recruits. My property, all 60 acres of it, was not, and had never been, part of her shiny new HOA. My farm was here long before the first McMansion foundation was ever poured. The access road we shared was a county easement, not her private driveway. I had checked the deeds, the county records, and the original plat maps myself before they even broke ground on that plastic paradise next door. Karen, I said, my voice dangerously calm, you are trespassing, and those men, I nodded towards the surveyors, are aiding and abetting. You have exactly 60 seconds to get off my property before I call the sheriff. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Miller. We have a legal right. Section 4, subsection C of the county's Community Development Ordinance of 1998 allows for the appropriation of underutilized agricultural parcels for essential community infrastructure. Your field has been designated as such by the HOA Architectural Review Committee. She tapped the binder. It's all in here, perfectly legal. We'll even compensate you at the county-assessed agricultural land value. It's quite generous, really. Underutilized. The word echoed in my mind. I was up before dawn every single day tending these bushes. I had spent the last 5 years and a small fortune getting this field USDA certified organic, a process so grueling it made boot camp look like a vacation. Every drop of water, every nutrient, every pest control measure was documented and scrutinized under federal law. This land wasn't underutilized. It was the most meticulously managed 60 acres in the entire state. That ordinance, I said, stepping forward until the ancient, rusted barbed wire fence was the only thing between us, applies to unincorporated county land zoned for transition. This is a multi-generational, privately owned, federally certified agricultural operation. You don't have a legal leg to stand on, and your committee has no authority here. Her face hardened, the faux neighborly facade melting away to reveal the granite entitlement beneath. You can hire all the lawyers you want, old man. This is happening. The preliminary grading is scheduled for Monday. You can either accept our generous offer, or we'll see you in court after the fact. By then, the parking lot will already be built. She turned on her heel, a galleon in full sail, her surveyors scurrying after her like pilot fish. I stood there long after her car had disappeared, the dust settling on the quiet county road. The air still smelled of her perfume. Monday. They were bringing bulldozers on Monday. She thought this was a battle over a field. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man who had spent his entire life fighting for things he believed in. And I believed in this land. The quiet hum of the cicadas was soon replaced by the roar of a diesel engine in my mind. Monday. The deadline was a classic intimidation tactic designed to induce panic and force a quick surrender. But panic wasn't in my operational vocabulary. Assessment, planning, execution. That was the rhythm I'd lived by for 3 decades. My first move wasn't to a lawyer, but to my office, a small, wood-paneled room in the back of the farmhouse. The walls were covered not with medals or military photos, but with topographical maps of my land, soil composition charts, and framed certificates. The most important one, the one that took 5 years of blood, sweat, and paperwork to earn, hung directly over my desk, the official USDA organic certification. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a binding contract with the federal government. I pulled out the massive 3-ring binder that contained every document related to that certification. It was thicker than Karen's pathetic HOA rulebook. I flipped through soil purity tests, water source evaluations, lists of approved organic pesticides and fertilizers, most of which were just beneficial insects and compost tea, and the annual inspection reports. The language was dense, bureaucratic, and absolute. The certified land was designated for a single, specific purpose: the cultivation of organic blueberries under strict federal guidelines. Any alteration to the land's composition, any introduction of prohibited substances, like, say, petrochemicals dripping from 1,000 minivans, or any change in its fundamental use would immediately invalidate the certification. More than that, it would trigger a federal investigation and potentially massive fines for causing the violation. I felt a grim smile touch my lips for the first time that day. Karen, in her infinite wisdom, hadn't just picked a fight with a retired Marine. She had picked a fight with the United States Department of Agriculture. My next call was to the county records office. I spoke with a clerk named Mary, a woman whose voice sounded as dry as the ancient deeds she filed. I asked for a complete history of the ordinance Karen had cited, Community Development Ordinance 1998-4C. Mary was quiet for a moment, the only sound the rustling of paper. "That's an odd one to ask about, sir," she said finally. "That ordinance was part of a package for the old Ridgeview Development Project. It was highly specific to that parcel and was superseded by the Unified Development Code in 2005. It hasn't been legally enforceable for almost 20 years. My smile widened. Karen wasn't just misinterpreting an ordinance. She was citing one that was legally defunct. She had built her entire legal threat on a ghost. It was sloppy, arrogant, and exactly the kind of fatal mistake a bully makes when they assume their opponent won't fight back. I spent the rest of the afternoon making copies. I copied my deed, the plat maps showing my property lines clearly established in 1948, the county's current zoning laws for my parcel, agricultural exclusive, and the first 20 pages of my USDA certification binder, highlighting the sections on land use restrictions. I then drove into town and found a notary public at the local bank, a young woman who looked at the stack of papers with wide eyes. I had her notarize a formal cease and desist letter I had drafted myself, citing Karen's trespass, her reliance on a defunct ordinance, and the potential for federal violations against my certified organic farm. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly uncompromising. It stated that any attempt by the HOA or its contractors to enter my property or alter my land in any way would be met with immediate legal action, seeking full compensatory and punitive damages. I made 3 copies, one for Karen, one for the HOA's management company, and one for my own records. I wasn't going to wait for Monday. I was going on the offensive. That evening, I drove to the grand gaudy entrance of the estates at Willow Creek. There was no guard gate, just a ridiculously oversized sign and a fountain. I found Karen's house easily. It was the largest one, with a perfectly manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. A small, tasteful sign near the door read, "Karen Miller, HOA President." I walked up the driveway, my boots making confident sounds on the pristine concrete, and taped the notarized letter squarely to her front door. The response was faster than I expected. My phone rang at 6 a.m. the next morning. It was Karen. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice a shrill instrument of pure indignation. "Taping this ridiculous, threatening letter to my door. This is harassment." I was already out in the field, a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and purple over my blueberry bushes. "Good morning, Karen," I said calmly. "I just wanted to make sure you received my official response to your threats of yesterday. Since you plan on bringing heavy machinery to my property line on Monday, I felt a certain urgency was required." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. Your response? This is nonsense. A defunct ordinance? Federal certification? You think some piece of paper about your little hobby farm is going to stop the progress of this community?" Hobby farm. That one stung, but I didn't let it show. "It's not just a piece of paper, Karen. It's federal law. The same way tax law isn't just a suggestion. If one of your bulldozers so much as scrapes the topsoil of that certified field, you, your board, and the company you hired could be facing penalties from the USDA that would make your HOA's entire annual budget look like pocket change. I'm not just talking fines, I'm talking about potential land remediation costs ordered by a federal judge." The silence on the other end was deeply satisfying. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process a threat that didn't come from her own playbook of fines and bylaws. "You're bluffing," she finally said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge of certainty. It was now laced with a thin thread of doubt. "I'm a retired master gunnery sergeant," I replied, my voice dropping to the low, even tone I used for delivering immutable facts. "We don't bluff." I hung up the phone. The calm didn't last. By noon, a new letter arrived via certified mail, this one from the HOA's law firm. It was a masterpiece of legalese, full of whereas and heretofore clauses, but the gist was simple. They acknowledged my letter, but rejected its claims. They asserted that their interpretation of the spirit of the county's development goals gave them the authority they needed. They called my USDA certification a private agricultural matter that had no bearing on their community infrastructure project. They were doubling down. But there was a new element. The letter also included a fine for $500 for unauthorized signage, citing the notarized letter I had taped to Karen's door. It was petty, it was absurd, and it was a declaration that they intended to fight this not on legal merits, but through a campaign of bureaucratic harassment. They were trying to bleed me dry with 1,000 paper cuts. That's when I knew I needed allies. I couldn't fight an entire organization, even a foolish one, on my own. My first thought was the community itself. Surely not everyone in that sprawling development of identical houses was a Kool-Aid drinking follower of Queen Karen. I logged onto the local community's social media page, a place I usually avoided like the plague. It was mostly posts about lost cats and recommendations for plumbers, but after a bit of digging, I found what I was looking for. A thread from 3 months ago titled HOA Overreach. It was a goldmine. There were dozens of comments from residents complaining about Karen's tyrannical rule. A retired school teacher fined for a wind chime that was deemed excessively melodic. A young couple ordered to rip out a vegetable garden from their backyard because it violated the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. And then I found him. A user named LegalEagle88 who had posted a long, detailed breakdown of how the HOA was misapplying its own bylaws to levy exorbitant fines. His name was Arthur Chen, a young corporate lawyer who had moved in a year ago. His post was smart, well-reasoned, and full of righteous anger. His parents, who lived in the same development, had been fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their shutters. I sent him a private message, introducing myself and giving him a brief, no-nonsense summary of my situation. I attached a digital copy of my cease and desist and the law firm's ridiculous response. I didn't ask for help directly. I just laid out the facts and ended with a simple question. "Does this sound familiar to you?" His reply came in under 5 minutes. "Mr. Miller, I've been waiting for someone like you. When can we meet?" We met the next day at a small coffee shop in town, far from the prying eyes of the Willow Creek HOA. Arthur Chen was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with a sharp suit and an even sharper mind. He had a stack of documents with him that rivaled my own. "My parents are good people," he said, pushing a file across the table towards me. "They bought that house to be closer to their grandkids. Then Karen got elected president. She runs the board like it's her personal kingdom. She targets anyone who questions her, using the bylaws as a weapon. The fines for my parents' shutters were just the beginning. She's put liens on 3 houses for things as trivial as leaving a trash can out an hour too long. He opened the file. It was full of letters, fine notices, and angry emails from other residents. A pattern of abuse clear as day. The problem, Arthur explained, is that everyone is afraid to fight back alone. The HOA has a law firm on retainer, paid for by our own dues. They use it to intimidate residents into compliance. It's cheaper to pay the ridiculous fine than to hire a lawyer to fight it. He looked at my paperwork, his eyes lighting up as he read about the defunct ordinance and the USDA certification. "This is different," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "This isn't about the color of a mailbox. You're not even a member. She has no jurisdiction. And the federal angle, oh, this is beautiful." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's given you the perfect weapon. She thinks she's fighting a zoning dispute. But you can turn this into a federal case. The key is to let her make the first move, a physical one." The strategy was cold, calculating, and brilliant. "You want me to let them start digging?" I asked. The thought of a bulldozer blade touching my soil making my gut clench. "Not just digging," Arthur said. "We need them to commit a clear, documented act of trespass and property damage on the certified land. We need photos, video, maybe even a sheriff's deputy there as a witness. Right now, it's just letters and threats. We need to bait the trap. We let her think she's won, let her get arrogant, let her parade her victory in front of the whole community. And then, when she's at her most triumphant, we drop the hammer. Not just on the HOA, but on her personally. The board members can be held personally liable for knowingly authorizing an action that violates federal law." The plan was audacious. It required a level of patience and nerve that felt familiar to me, like waiting in a blind for an enemy patrol. We spent the next 2 hours mapping it out. Arthur would start quietly reaching out to other disgruntled residents, building a coalition. He would also draft the real legal paperwork, not just a cease and desist, but a full-blown lawsuit and a request for an emergency injunction, ready to be filed the moment they broke ground. My job was to play the part of the stubborn old farmer being slowly worn down. I would send one more letter, a carefully worded response from a legal consultant, Arthur, writing pro bono, reiterating my position but offering to discuss a potential boundary adjustment in good faith. It was a feint, a gesture designed to look like a weakening resolve. We knew Karen would see it as a sign of imminent victory and press her advantage. "She'll schedule a big show of it," Arthur predicted. "She won't be able to resist. She'll probably announce it at the next HOA meeting, make it the centerpiece of her president's report. We need to be there for that." Getting into an HOA meeting as a non-resident was tricky, but Arthur had a contact, the retired school teacher who'd been fined for the wind chimes. She was happy to sign me in as her guest. The final piece of the puzzle was the USDA. I needed to get them involved, but at the right time. I placed a call to the regional certification office and spoke to a man named David Chen, a field agent who had conducted my last 2 annual inspections. David was a stickler for the rules, a man who lived and breathed the federal code. I explained the situation, and he was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Miller," he said finally, his voice tight with bureaucratic outrage, "this is a serious threat to a certified operation. The integrity of the USDA organic seal is paramount." I told him our plan, to wait for them to break ground. He was hesitant at first, worried about the potential damage. "Sir, if they contaminate that soil, it could take years to get it recertified." "I understand the risk, David," I said, "but this woman and her board won't stop unless they face consequences they can't ignore. A warning letter won't do it. I need you to be ready. When I call, I need an official USDA representative on site as quickly as possible to document the violation." There was another pause. "I'll be on standby," he said, "and I'll have a draft of an official notice of violation and potential penalties ready to go. The moment you have photographic evidence of a violation in progress, send it to me. The penalties for this kind of willful destruction of a certified organic operation are not trivial. They start in the 5-figure range and go up very, very quickly." The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Now all we had to do was wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The week leading up to the HOA meeting was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Karen, emboldened by my letter offering to discuss the matter, ramped up her campaign. Flyers appeared on the community bulletin board announcing the Willow Creek Community Enhancement Project, complete with a poorly photoshopped architect's rendering of a gravel lot where my blueberry field should be. The flyer touted the new convenient parking for the upcoming Founders Day Gala and thanked President Karen Miller for her visionary leadership. It was nauseating. The HOA's lawyers sent another letter, formally rejecting my offer to discuss and stating that they would be moving forward with their original plan as outlined. They graciously informed me that they would not pursue the $500 fine for the unauthorized signage if I ceased all further antagonistic communications. They thought I was beaten. Meanwhile, Arthur was working behind the scenes. He met with 6 other families who had been targeted by Karen. He collected their stories, their fine notices, their rejected appeals. He was building a case file not just on my issue, but on a systemic pattern of abuse of power. The retired teacher, Mrs. Gable, confirmed she would sign me into the meeting. Another resident, a tech guy who had been fined for having a satellite dish visible from the street, offered to discreetly record the meeting on his phone. The night of the meeting, I put on a simple collared shirt and clean jeans, aiming to look like a concerned, slightly out-of-his-depth landowner, not a strategic opponent. Mrs. Gable met me in the parking lot of the community clubhouse. "I can't believe she's doing this to you, John," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "That farm has been there forever. She's a monster." I just nodded. Tonight, we just listen. The clubhouse meeting room was beige and soulless, filled with uncomfortable folding chairs. About 40 residents were there. Karen sat at a long table at the front with the other 4 board members, who all looked either terrified of her or bored out of their minds. She ran the meeting with an iron fist, shutting down any questions she didn't like with a sharp rap of her gavel. Finally, she arrived at the main event. The president's report. She stood up, beaming at the small crowd. "Friends, neighbors, I have a wonderful announcement to make regarding our upcoming Founders Day Gala. As you know, parking has always been a challenge, but thanks to the board's tireless efforts, we have secured a permanent solution." She clicked a button on a remote, and the amateurish rendering of the gravel parking lot appeared on a projector screen behind her. A few people clapped uncertainly. "Through a long-neglected county ordinance, we have been able to acquire the use of the adjacent, underutilized agricultural plot to create the Willow Creek Community Parking Annex. This will provide over 200 much-needed spaces for our events." She paused for dramatic effect. Now, the owner of the property was initially uncooperative. A few people chuckled. He made some rather outlandish claims, sent some very nasty letters. But after our lawyers explained the legal realities, he has seen the light and has agreed to cooperate with this vital community project. My blood ran cold. She was lying, bald-faced, to the entire community, painting me as a defeated crank to cement her own power. It was more perfect than I could have imagined. A man in the back raised his hand. "Karen, what did we have to pay for the land? Is this going to raise our dues?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "A mere formality. The compensation is set by the county at a standard agricultural rate. It's a negligible cost for such a massive benefit to our property values," she said, "a complete fabrication." She then announced the groundbreaking ceremony. "To celebrate this momentous achievement, we will have a small ceremony next Monday morning at 9 a.m. We'll have coffee and donuts, and our contractor will break ground on the new annex. I encourage you all to come out and witness this new chapter in the history of Willow Creek." The meeting ended, and as people filed out, I could hear them buzzing about the new parking lot. Karen was preening, accepting congratulations from her sycophants. She had walked right into the center of the trap and pulled the pin on the grenade herself. She hadn't just announced her intentions. She had publicly lied, misrepresented a legal situation, and invited the entire community to witness her crime. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The weekend was the longest of my life. I walked the perimeter of the field a dozen times a day, the scent of the ripening blueberries filling the air. It was a sensory anchor, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Arthur and I had a final strategy session on Sunday night. He had the injunction papers ready to file. The tech resident, Mark, had sent us the crystal clear audio recording of the meeting. Mrs. Gable and 3 other residents had agreed to be present on Monday as witnesses. I had spoken to the sheriff's department, not to press charges, but to request a civil standby. I explained that I was anticipating a property dispute with a neighboring HOA and wanted an officer present to keep the peace. Deputy Miller, no relation, a strange coincidence, said he'd be there at 8:45 a.m. My final call was to David Chen at the USDA. "It's happening tomorrow morning," I said. 9 a.m. I could hear him typing on his keyboard. "I'll be 2 towns over on a scheduled inspection. I can be at your property in under an hour from the moment you call. Remember, I need clear, undeniable evidence of them disturbing the soil on the certified parcel. Get me that, and I can unleash the full power of the federal government." On Monday morning, the air was thick with anticipation. A pale sun fought to break through the morning haze. At 8:45, Deputy Miller's cruiser pulled quietly into my driveway. He was a big, calm man with a slow smile. I explained the situation briefly, showing him my property markers and the certified letter I had sent. "So you just want me to stand here and watch?" he asked. "That's it, Deputy," I said. "Just be a witness." Right on cue, the circus arrived. A small convoy of cars pulled up along the county road. Karen got out of her oversized SUV, dressed in a bright yellow pantsuit, looking like a deranged canary. About 15 residents, including her board cronies, milled about, holding paper cups of coffee. A large flatbed truck rumbled up the road and stopped. On its back was a small, bright orange Bobcat bulldozer. The driver, a weary-looking man in a greasy baseball cap, hopped out and started unchaining it. Karen gathered her flock on the edge of my property, just on the other side of the old wire fence. She saw Deputy Miller's car in my driveway, but seemed unconcerned, likely assuming I had called him in a pathetic, last-ditch effort to intimidate her. She raised a portable megaphone to her lips, its squawk echoing across the quiet morning. "Welcome, everyone, to a historic day for the estates at Willow Creek," she bellowed. "Today we break ground on a project that demonstrates our community's commitment to progress." She gestured grandly at my field. I stood on my side of the fence, arms crossed, with Mrs. Gable and my other witnesses standing a respectful distance behind me. Arthur was parked down the road, out of sight, waiting for my signal. Karen gave me a smug, pitying look. "Mr. Miller is here to watch the proceedings," she announced into the megaphone. "We're so glad he came to appreciate this wonderful new addition." The Bobcat driver, having unloaded the machine, walked over to Karen. "Where do you want me to start, ma'am?" Karen pointed directly at the corner of my field, at a wooden stake topped with a bright pink ribbon that her surveyors had illegally placed last week. "Start right there," she commanded. "Scrape about 6 inches of topsoil off that whole corner section, about 50 by 50 feet. We need to clear it for the gravel base." The driver nodded, climbed into the Bobcat, and fired it up with a belch of diesel smoke. This was it, the moment of truth. My heart was pounding, a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. The little bulldozer lurched forward, its metal tracks clattering. It crossed the invisible property line. I raised my phone, its camera already recording. The driver lowered the front bucket. With a metallic groan, the steel blade bit into the rich, dark soil of my organic farm, tearing through the delicate clover cover crop I had planted to enrich the earth. It scraped a long, ugly brown scar into the green landscape, piling up a mound of dirt that had taken me years to cultivate to federal standards. I had my evidence. I lowered my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Arthur. "Execute," I said and hung up. The second was to David Chen. "They're in. The violation is in progress." Then I started walking, calm and deliberate, towards the fence. I reached the fence just as the Bobcat driver was reversing to take another scoop. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I simply stood there, my shadow falling across the fresh scar in the earth. Deputy Miller, seeing me move, got out of his cruiser and began walking slowly toward the scene. "That's enough," I said, my voice carrying easily in the quiet air. The driver stopped, looking confused. Karen marched over to the fence, her face a mask of triumphant fury. "You can't stop this, Miller. It's happening. Get back on your porch before I have you arrested for interfering." "Actually, ma'am," Deputy Miller said, his voice a low rumble as he came to stand beside me, "this is his property. You in this vehicle are the ones trespassing." Karen whirled on him. I have a right. It's in the county ordinance. The ordinance from 1998 that was rescinded in 2005? I asked innocently. Or are you referring to a different one? The color drained from Karen's face. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a sleek black sedan pulled up, and Arthur Chen got out, holding a briefcase. He walked with the brisk, confident stride of a man who knew he held all the cards. Karen Miller? He asked, though he knew perfectly well who she was. My name is Arthur Chen. I represent the owner of this property, Mr. John Miller. You and the entire board of the estates at Willow Creek HOA are hereby served. He opened his briefcase and produced a thick sheaf of papers, which he handed to a stunned Karen. That is a lawsuit for trespass, property damage, and a request for an emergency injunction to halt all further activity. It was just electronically filed with the county court 5 minutes ago. Karen stared at the papers as if they were a snake. You can't, she stammered. This is community business. It became my business when you targeted my client, Arthur said coolly. And it's about to become the business of the federal government as well. On cue, a dark green Ford sedan with official government plates pulled up behind Arthur's car. David Chen from the USDA stepped out, wearing a crisp official polo shirt with the department's seal on it. He held a clipboard and a digital camera. He walked past all of us, went straight to the scar in the ground, and began taking pictures from multiple angles. He knelt, took a soil sample, and placed it in a sterile bag. Karen and her gaggle of residents watched, their jaws agape. The festive atmosphere of coffee and donuts had evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. David finally walked over to the group, his face grim and official. Who is in charge here? He asked, his eyes scanning the crowd and landing on Karen, who was still holding the lawsuit like a dead thing. I am, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I am the president of the Homeowners Association. David made a note on his clipboard. Ma'am, my name is David Chen. I am a field agent for the United States Department of Agriculture. You have just directed a contractor to knowingly damage a federally certified USDA organic agricultural operation. This is a direct violation of Title VII of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 205.203. He spoke with the passionless precision of a man reciting scripture. This violation carries a civil penalty of up to $11,000 per infraction. Given the premeditated nature of this event, I can assure you my office will be recommending the maximum penalty. Furthermore, the HOA, as the authorizing body, will be held liable for all costs associated with the soil remediation and the multi-year process of recertifying this parcel of land. A conservative estimate for that would be in the low six figures. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of residents. One of the board members, a mousy-looking man who hadn't spoken all morning, looked like he was going to be sick. David wasn't finished. We will also be opening an investigation into whether this action constitutes willful destruction of a federally protected agricultural entity, which could open the door to criminal charges. A full report will be on my supervisor's desk by noon. He turned and looked at the Bobcat driver, who seemed to be trying to merge with the seat of his machine. And you, sir, David said, pointing his pen at him, your company is also liable. I'd advise you to shut down that machine and remove it from this property immediately. The driver didn't need to be told twice. He killed the engine, scrambled to load the Bobcat back onto the flatbed, and was gone in a cloud of dust and panicked energy, leaving Karen and her followers standing in stunned silence. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Karen. The lawsuit Arthur filed was airtight, and the USDA violation was the nail in the coffin. The HOA's law firm, upon reviewing the evidence, the defunct ordinance, the federal certification, the video of the groundbreaking, and the impending USDA fines, immediately advised the board to settle. But it was the social and political fallout within Willow Creek that truly sealed her fate. The story spread through the development like wildfire. The residents who had come for donuts went home with a story of epic mismanagement in federal intervention. Mark, the tech guy, posted his audio recording of the meeting, where Karen had lied about my cooperation and downplayed the costs, to the community's private social media page. It was an instant bombshell. People were furious. They weren't just angry about the potential six-figure liability that was about to crater their finances and send their HOA dues into the stratosphere. They were angry about the lies, the arrogance, the years of petty tyranny that had finally culminated in this public disaster. The narrative Karen had so carefully crafted of the stubborn old farmer standing in the way of progress was shattered. The new narrative was clear. A power-mad HOA president had picked a fight with a respected veteran to build a parking lot they didn't really need, and in doing so, had nearly bankrupted the entire community through her own incompetence and ego. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that Thursday night, not by Karen, but by a petition signed by over 100 residents, a legal maneuver Arthur had helped them draft. The purpose of the meeting was singular, a vote of no confidence in the removal of the entire board. I attended that meeting, not as a guest this time, but as an invited speaker. The clubhouse was packed. People were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The air was electric with anger. Karen and her board sat at the front table, but they looked smaller now, diminished. They weren't authority figures anymore. They were defendants at their own trial. The meeting began with a motion to remove Karen as president. Before the vote, resident after resident stood up to speak. It was a floodgate opening. Mrs. Gable spoke eloquently about the fines for her wind chimes and the culture of fear Karen had created. The young couple spoke about being forced to rip out their children's vegetable garden. Mark spoke about the satellite dish. Arthur's parents spoke about the shutter paint fiasco. Story after story poured out, a litany of petty abuses that had been borne in silence for too long. My story was just the one that had finally broken the dam. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood at the podium and laid out the facts. I talked about my grandfather planting the first blueberry bush. I talked about the 5 years of hard work to earn the organic certification. I explained what that certification meant, not just as a label, but as a commitment to a way of farming, a promise I had made to the land itself. Your president, I said, looking directly at Karen, didn't just trespass on my property. She tried to take a piece of my family's history and turn it into a gravel lot out of convenience and ego. She risked your community's financial solvency by ignoring repeated warnings, by relying on laws that don't exist, and by arrogantly assuming that federal regulations were just a private matter she could ignore. I paused, letting the words sink in. This was never about parking. It was about power, and when someone is given a little bit of power, their true character is revealed. You've all seen her character. Now you get to decide if it's what you want leading your community. The vote was nearly unanimous. Karen was removed as president, as were the other board members who had blindly supported her. It was a brutal public humiliation. She didn't say a word. She just gathered her things, her face a pale, tight mask, and walked out of the room to a chorus of stony silence. A new interim board was elected on the spot, led by the retired school teacher, Mrs. Gable. Her first act as president was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the community. In the weeks that followed, the legal dust settled. The new HOA board, guided by Arthur, entered into a settlement agreement with me. They paid for the full cost of the soil remediation, a process that involved bringing in certified organic topsoil and compost to repair the damage from the bobcat. They paid for all of my legal fees, and they paid a significant sum in punitive damages, which I immediately donated to a local veteran support charity. The USDA, true to their word, levied a massive fine against the HOA, but after negotiations and a clear demonstration of the new board's cooperative spirit, they agreed to a structured payment plan that wouldn't completely bankrupt the community. Karen Miller, facing personal liability in the lawsuit and complete ostracization from the neighborhood she once ruled, sold her house at a loss and moved away within 2 months. I never saw her again. Life returned to a new kind of normal. The ugly brown scar on my land slowly began to heal, covered with fresh soil and a new planting of clover. The relationship between my farm and the estates at Willow Creek was transformed. Mrs. Gable and the new board were respectful, communicative, and committed to being good neighbors. They even organized a volunteer day where residents came and helped me spread mulch around the blueberry bushes, a symbolic act of peace and restoration. A few months later, during the peak of the harvest season, I put a small hand-painted sign at the end of my driveway. It read, Miller Family Farm, USDA organic blueberries. You pick Saturdays. Neighbors welcome. That first Saturday, dozens of families from Willow Creek came, their children running through the rows of bushes, laughing as they filled their buckets with ripe, sweet berries. They weren't just customers, they were neighbors. They were the community Karen had claimed to be serving, a community she had never really understood. Standing there watching a young father from the house next door show his daughter how to find the darkest, ripest berry, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper than just the absence of conflict. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of having defended not just a piece of land, but a principle. It was the victory of patience over aggression, of integrity over entitlement. The berries that year were the sweetest they had ever been.